Welcome back, Earth lovers, to Earthly Delights. If you've ever stood in your garden with a shovel in your hands, digging into soil that feels more like dry flour or solid concrete than a living ecosystem, you're definitely not alone. I've been there too. For years, I followed the same advice most beginners hear. I bought bags of synthetic fertilizer, sprayed chemical solutions, and focused almost entirely on feeding my plants. But eventually, my garden felt like it was running on its very last drop of fuel. The soil was lifeless, hard, compacted, and almost completely empty of visible life. And then, I saw her. It was a cloudy morning after a gentle rain. I lifted a forgotten piece of wet cardboard lying in one corner of the yard, and underneath it were several earthworms, glistening as they moved through dark, rich soil. At that moment, something clicked. I realized I had been looking at gardening completely backward. Did you know Charles Darwin, yes, the father of evolution himself, was so fascinated by earthworms that he devoted his final book to them in 1881? After 40 years of studying these humble creatures, he wrote that it could be doubted whether any other animals had played such an important role in the history of the world as these lowly organized creatures. He called them nature's plows. And he was absolutely right. Earthworms are far more than slimy crawlers that make some people uncomfortable. They are among the primary engineers of the planet's fertility. As they tunnel through the ground, they create permanent vertical pathways that can reach up to 6 feet deep, allowing water to infiltrate 10 times faster while reducing runoff by as much as 90%. And what they leave behind, their casts or castings, is what farmers have called black gold for generations. Worm castings contain 5 times more nitrogen, 7 times more available phosphorus, and 12 times more exchangeable potassium than the surrounding soil. So how do we bring them back? How do we transform a lifeless patch of compacted clay into a thriving, breathing ecosystem filled with these silent underground workers? Today, we're looking at 8 scientifically backed, highly practical things you can start doing this very week to bring earthworms into your garden fast. These aren't expensive chemical shortcuts or complicated techniques. They're simple, affordable methods designed to work in harmony with nature. Are you ready to sweeten your soil, feed your invisible allies, and unlock the real potential beneath your garden? Let's dive in. Part 1. The molasses and soft veggie trench, sweetening the soil. Let's begin with one important truth that most beginners are never told. Earthworms do not care about your plants, not even a little. What they care about is dead, decomposing organic matter. But here's the secret. They don't actually eat raw vegetable scraps directly. Because worms have no teeth, they depend on a huge community of soil microorganisms, especially bacteria and fungi, to pre-digest their food before they consume it. So how do we send a signal underground, telling them that a 5-star feast is waiting? We use an old-world gardening method, the fermented veggie trench. For this, you'll need around 2 pounds of soft, watery green scraps. Think spinach stems, lettuce leaves, cabbage trimmings, or zucchini ends. Chop everything into pieces about 1 to 2 inches long. Then add 1 medium banana peel, shredded into small strips. Banana peels are famous in worm gardening because they're rich in potassium, and as they break down, they release ethylene gas, which acts as a powerful chemical signal that attracts organisms toward the decomposing material. Now comes the magic catalyst, unsulfured blackstrap molasses. Old-time farmers called this sweetening the soil. Molasses is essentially concentrated carbon and carbohydrate fuel. Dissolve 1 tablespoon of molasses into 2 cups of warm, non-chlorinated water. Then pour it over your chopped scraps. What happens next is a microbial explosion. Keep the mixture loosely covered in a bucket for about 48 hours. It should begin warming slightly and develop a faintly sweet, yeasty smell. Next, dig a shallow trench about 6 to 8 inches deep along the edge of your garden bed. Pour in the bubbling, pre-fermented mixture, spread it evenly, and cover it with 3 to 4 inches of soil. That soil cover is critical. It reduces odors, keeps flies away, and creates the cool, dark, moist conditions that earthworms love. Within about a week, gently pull back the soil. Instead of finding nothing but rotting scraps, you may discover a writhing concentration of earthworms gathered together in what gardeners often call worm balls, working day and night to transform that sweet organic material into rich, dark black gold. Part 2. Stop leaving your soil naked. The protective canopy. Imagine stepping outside on a blistering 90-degree summer day without a shirt, a hat, or sunscreen. You would quickly overheat, dehydrate, and start searching desperately for shade. Yet many gardeners leave their soil completely bare and exposed to the elements because a clean, uncovered garden bed looks neat. To an earthworm, bare soil is not neat. It's a hostile desert. Earthworms breathe through their skin. To absorb oxygen, their bodies must remain constantly moist, roughly as damp as a wrung-out sponge. If their skin dries out, they suffocate and die. When direct sunlight beats down on exposed soil, temperatures can climb above 70 degrees while moisture disappears within hours. The worms are then forced to retreat deep beneath the surface, enter a dormant state known as diapause, where they curl tightly into a ball protected by mucus, or perish. Fortunately, the solution is beautifully simple. Never leave your soil naked. Cover it with a thick organic blanket of mulch. In autumn, don't bag up those fallen leaves and send them to the landfill. Collect them, shred them with your lawnmower, and spread a 2 to 3 inch layer across your garden beds. You can also use clean straw, shredded cardboard, or grass clippings from your mower. This organic canopy performs 3 powerful jobs at the same time. It keeps soil temperatures cooler and more stable. It locks moisture into the ground, reducing how often you need to water. And it provides a continuous, slow-release buffet of decomposing cellulose that surface-dwelling epigeic worms find almost impossible to resist. As the mulch decomposes from the bottom upward, it creates a dark, humid microclimate directly at the soil surface. Pull back a handful of damp straw on a hot summer afternoon, and underneath, you may find soil that is cool, crumbly, moist, and alive with active earthworms. You've given them a home. Now they can begin building yours. Part 3. Milk and molasses, the microbe-multiplying elixir. What if I told you that a gallon of milk and a bottle of molasses could do more for your soil structure than a commercial aerator or chemical spray? It sounds like something pulled from an internet myth, but the idea was backed by a landmark 10-year study involving Nebraska dairyman David Wetzel, working alongside soil specialists and extension agents from the University of Nebraska. David had excess skim milk that he didn't want to waste, so he started spraying it across depleted pasture land. The results were astonishing. Even in the middle of winter, when temperatures dropped to 15 below zero and the ground was frozen solid, a soil probe could still penetrate deeply into the pastures treated with milk. Meanwhile, the untreated fields remained hard as iron. The treated soil had doubled its porosity, meaning it could absorb roughly twice as much air and water. So why does milk appear to work so dramatically? Raw milk is one of the most biologically complex foods on Earth. It contains amino acids, proteins, active enzymes, and natural sugars that feed the native microorganisms already living in the soil. Even more importantly, raw milk is rich in B-complex vitamins, which act as powerful microbial stimulants. As microbial populations explode, they release sticky substances and mucus that bind tiny soil particles together into stable aggregates. Heavy, compacted clay begins transforming into looser, more breathable, sponge-like soil. And as we already know, where active microbes flourish, earthworms tend to follow. To make this old-fashioned sweet soil elixir at home, mix 1 part milk with 4 parts unchlorinated water. Make sure the water is free from chlorine, because chlorinated tap water can kill the very microorganisms you're trying to encourage. One easy method is to leave tap water sitting uncovered in a bucket for 24 hours. Then dissolve 1/4 cup of blackstrap molasses into the mixture. Spray or drench this golden liquid directly over your garden beds or compost pile. The resulting microbial bloom acts like an underground chemical signal, drawing earthworms from surrounding areas toward your garden almost like magic. Part 4. Pre-aged coffee grounds, the earthworm aphrodisiac. If you're anything like me, the day doesn't really begin until you've had a hot cup of coffee. And if you've been throwing your used coffee grounds into the trash, You may be throwing away one of the most powerful worm attractants available. Earthworms have an almost legendary reputation for loving coffee grounds. In fact, experienced vermicomposters sometimes joke that coffee grounds are a natural aphrodisiac for worms. They eat them, become energized, and begin reproducing rapidly. But there's a catch. If you dump fresh, hot coffee grounds straight from your brewer onto a garden bed, you may actually create more problems than benefits. Fresh grounds are highly sterile because they've just been soaked with boiling water. They may still contain residual caffeine, which has mild antibacterial properties. And when coffee grounds are applied too thickly, they can dry into a crusty, water-resistant layer that acidifies the soil. Remember, worms are feeding largely on the bacteria colonizing organic material, not on sterile material itself. So if you want to transform coffee grounds into a supercharged worm magnet, you need to pre-age or pre-rot them first. Instead of spreading them immediately, collect your used grounds in a separate container with a lid and leave them there for 1 or 2 weeks. Mix in something high in sugar, such as a mashed banana peel, a few crushed strawberries, or leftover carrot pulp from a juicer. Keep the mixture damp. Within a few days, you should begin noticing soft, white, fuzzy mold and thin fungal threads spreading across the coffee grounds. That's the signal that decomposition is underway, and large microbial colonies are beginning to form. Once you sprinkle this pre-aged coffee mixture over the soil and water it in, worms may begin attacking it almost immediately. The fine, gritty texture of coffee grounds also serves another purpose. Because worms don't have teeth, they rely on tiny particles of grit inside their muscular gizzard to grind their food. Pre-rotted coffee grounds can provide both food and a useful digestive aid. Part 5. Alfalfa meal and pellets, the triacontanol growth hormone. If your garden soil is severely depleted, badly compacted, and seems almost completely lifeless, you need an organic amendment capable of acting like a biological jumpstart. Enter alfalfa meal. Made from shredded alfalfa plants, this vegan-friendly, non-burning fertilizer is well known for its balanced 2.511 NPK ratio, but its real superpower comes from a naturally occurring compound called triacontanol. Triacontanol is a powerful plant growth stimulant and hormone that promotes rapid cell division in both plants and soil microorganisms. When you add alfalfa meal or alfalfa pellets, which are commonly sold as inexpensive horse and rabbit feed at agricultural supply stores, you're introducing a rich source of plant protein and nitrogen into the soil. As soon as the pellets absorb water, they swell, break apart, and trigger a rapid aerobic microbial bloom. One fascinating European study showed that when researchers used leguminous plant material such as alfalfa in vermicomposting, the earthworm population increased more than 4-fold in only 45 days. The worms didn't simply grow larger. The high protein and nitrogen levels triggered intense reproduction, producing hundreds of cocoons and young worms. To use this method in your garden, scatter between 2 and 5 pounds of alfalfa meal or pellets across every 100 square feet of garden area. Lightly scratch it into the top inch of soil, then water thoroughly. There is one important caution, however. Because alfalfa contains so much nitrogen, applying it in a thick layer can cause significant heating during the first stage of aerobic decomposition. Those rising temperatures can drive worms away or even harm them. Always spread alfalfa thinly, or mix it thoroughly with dry carbon materials such as shredded autumn leaves or cardboard. That helps keep decomposition cooler, more balanced, and much more worm-friendly. Part 6. The magic of Bokashi, pre-digested fermentation. Traditional composting is a wonderful practice, but it does have limitations. Earthworms can be notoriously picky eaters. If you throw raw citrus peels, onions, garlic, pasta, bread, cheese, or small pieces of meat directly into a traditional worm bin or garden bed, you may end up with a foul-smelling, rotting mess that attracts rodents and flies while pushing your earthworms away. But there is a revolutionary Japanese method that bypasses these limitations and allows you to give your soil a much more diverse diet while making the material extremely attractive to earthworms. It's called Bokashi fermentation. Bokashi, meaning fermented organic matter, is an anaerobic process that uses wheat bran inoculated with effective microorganisms, or EM1, a specialized mixture of lactic acid bacteria, beneficial yeasts, and photosynthetic bacteria. Instead of allowing kitchen scraps to rot and decompose aerobically, you pack them tightly into a sealed, airtight bucket, sprinkle Bokashi bran between the layers, and allow everything to ferment. Because the process takes place without air, there is no foul rotting odor, only a clean, sweet-sour, pickled smell. And you can ferment almost everything, including dairy products, citrus, and cooked leftovers. The resulting pre-compost is highly acidic, usually with a pH between about 3.5 and 4.0. If you dropped earthworms directly into a freshly fermented bucket of Bokashi, they could suffer acid burns and die. But this is where the magic begins. When the fermented Bokashi material is buried deeply in a garden trench, or mixed with dry carbon bedding such as shredded cardboard or leaves, the surrounding soil and air begin neutralizing that acidity within just a few days. The microorganisms inside the Bokashi quickly shift from anaerobic conditions into a highly active aerobic environment, transforming those pickled scraps into a soft, nutrient-dense, microbe-packed buffet. Earthworms are attracted to this pre-digested material like iron filings to a magnet. Gardeners often report finding enormous worm balls, with thousands of worms concentrated around buried Bokashi, rapidly converting the fermented material into rich castings in less than 2 weeks. Part 7. Homemade Worm Chow, the ultimate plumping recipe. If you have a home vermicomposting bin, a raised garden bed, or one specific section of your garden where you want the earthworm population to multiply at lightning speed, you can give them a high-protein supplement known as worm chow. Commercial worm breeders have guarded recipes like this for decades because they help produce large, fat, healthy worms for the fishing bait industry. But even if your only goal is improving soil health, helping worms grow larger can still be highly beneficial. The bigger and healthier the worm, the more organic matter it can consume, and the more nutrient-dense castings it can produce. Making gourmet worm chow at home is incredibly simple, inexpensive, and requires only basic pantry ingredients. Here is my favorite proven recipe. Start with 2 cups of rolled oats and 1 cup of yellow cornmeal. Place them in an inexpensive coffee grinder or spice grinder and process them until they become a very fine, powdery flour. The finer the powder, the easier it is for toothless worms to consume. Next, add half a cup of alfalfa meal to provide that triacontanol microbial boost. Then add 1/8 of a cup of finely powdered dried eggshells. To prepare them safely, save your kitchen eggshells, rinse them thoroughly, bake them at 200 degrees for 10 minutes to eliminate the risk of salmonella, and grind them into a fine dust. This eggshell powder provides calcium carbonate, which helps stabilize soil pH and plays an important role in worm cocoons and reproduction. Finally, add 1/8 of a cup of azomite, or rock dust. This contributes more than 70 trace minerals, while also providing the fine grit worms need inside their gizzard to grind and digest food. Mix all the dry ingredients thoroughly. To use the chow, first moisten your garden bed or worm bedding. Then sprinkle only a very thin layer of the powder across the surface. Do not over-apply it. Too much high-protein chow can ferment too quickly and create a condition known as protein poisoning, or sour crop. A light dusting once each week is enough to watch your worm population begin to skyrocket. Part 8. Gentle irrigation and no-till, the rule of stillness. You can add all the molasses, milk, coffee grounds, and alfalfa in the world, but you will never build a permanent, thriving earthworm workforce if you continue destroying their home. That brings us to our final, and perhaps most important principle. The rule of stillness and gentle care. Earthworms are master architects. Deep burrowing anechoic species, including the famous nightcrawler, can spend their entire lives creating and maintaining permanent vertical tunnels that descend as much as 6 feet into the ground. They line those tunnels with nutrient-rich castings and mucus, creating stable pathways they use during their daily movements through the soil. But every spring, when you run a rototiller through the garden or dig deeply with a heavy shovel, you are essentially dropping a nuclear option into their civilization. Tillage destroys their permanent tunnels. It exposes worms to sharp blades that can cut them apart. It dries out the soil and brings them toward the surface, where birds can easily find them. Deep tillage can wipe out as much as 90% of an earthworm population in a single afternoon. If you truly want earthworms working for you, stop doing their job for them. Let the worms plow your soil. Switch to a no-till or no-dig gardening method. Place organic material on the surface and allow the worms to gradually pull it downward. How you water is equally important. Blasting your garden beds with a high-pressure hose can compact the surface, collapse worm tunnels, and create a hard crust that limits air exchange. Remember, worms depend on gaseous oxygen moving across their moist skin in order to breathe. Instead, try to imitate natural rainfall. Use a gentle watering wand, drip irrigation, or a micro-sprinkler system that keeps the soil evenly damp, about the consistency of a wrung-out sponge. And finally, get rid of synthetic chemical fertilizers and harsh pesticides. High applications of ammonium sulfate and anhydrous ammonia acidify soil and can be highly toxic to earthworms. Common chemical insecticides such as Sevin, as well as weed killers, can wipe out entire soil biomes for months. Choose natural, slow-release organic fertilizers and allow companion planting to help control pests. Give your worms a quiet, undisturbed, chemical-free sanctuary, and they will have no reason to leave. Build the garden from the soil up within. Only 2 months of making these changes in my own garden, the transformation felt almost miraculous. The soil that once behaved like lifeless clay became soft, dark, and beautifully crumbly. When I dug only a few inches beneath the surface, I no longer saw compacted dirt. I saw a living matrix. Every shovelful seemed to be filled with active, healthy earthworms. And as the worms came back, my plants took off. My tomatoes grew taller. My lettuce became sweeter. My pest problems almost disappeared. I had stopped fighting against nature. Instead, I had created an army of millions of tiny, silent allies working 24 hours a day, completely free of charge, to keep my soil alive. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world obsessed with quick fixes, chemical inputs, and synthetic shortcuts. We have been taught to treat soil like a sterile material whose only purpose is to hold plants upright, forcing us to keep pouring expensive chemicals into it just to keep a garden productive. But nature doesn't need our chemicals. It needs our partnership. When we feed the soil, we feed the microbes. When we feed the microbes, we feed the worms. And when we protect the worms, they build the very foundation of life beneath our feet. So I want to challenge you this week. Choose just 2 of these methods. Pick up a bottle of molasses. Start pre-aging your coffee grounds on the kitchen counter, or spread a thick, comfortable blanket of autumn leaves across your bare garden soil. Give those underground engineers the invitation they've been waiting for. What kind of garden do you want to create? One that depends on a chemical drip line to survive, or a living, self-improving ecosystem that becomes richer and more fertile with every passing season? The choice is beneath your feet. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today on Earthly Delights. If this video brought a little joy, a little curiosity, and some practical wisdom into your day, hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up, and share it with another gardener. Let's keep our hands dirty, our minds open, and our soils alive. Until next time, happy gardening, and I'll see you in the next grow session.